Australia woke to death? Is Australia woke to death? That is the question. Well, picking up on the trends and what's happening and kind of following through with current events and interest rate hikes and all this stuff, yes, Australia is woke to death. And I'll prove it to you in this video today. Australia is a very interesting country when it comes to divide. People were divided. So people, in the United States started to really see a divide during the whole Donald Trump administration. Families would be divided. Even it was such an effect. It was such a powerful effect that even in Canada, households, families became divided over politics. People were divided over the whole global warming thing back in 2010 or whatever. People were kind of like creating this divide on every front. But in Australia, it's really interesting. You started to see a divide in about 2010, 2011, 2012 when housing became out of reach, where the average citizen wasn't paying 4 times their annual income for a home. They were paying 13, 14 times their annual income for an average home. And things started to progress and get out of control. But a divide was created through housing. My wife divorced me because I'm not going to get into the property market, Mike. Or my wife is leaving me now that I can't pay the mortgage anymore on the property that she forced me to buy. So the divide has been big. The divide has been strong. And it's been going on for a long time now. Let's take a look at why Australia is woke to death, why it's dying. Australia is dying, folks. And we've been connecting the dots across the Commonwealth and visually seeing the patterns happening in Australia. Then the Canadian government wants to one-up the Australian government by making their citizens more destroying their citizens. But in Canada, it's like, oh, Australia's doing that. We should have been first to do that, to not better our lives, but destroy our lives. New Zealand, same thing. All these testing grounds that we've been following here on the show pretty much since 2015 or 2014 or whatever videos are still up. So let's take a look at why Australia is dying. This is just my opinion. I hope you guys could comment below your testimonies or what is happening down under, because this is what I'm seeing, living in Canada and following this for a long time. So there it is right there. Sydney, the Sydney Morning Herald, nearly 10,000 Australians have died. I'm not going to get into that. And why are more people dying in Australia? Many questions remain. I'm not going to get into that. What are the main causes of death in Australia? Not going to get into that. And you can go to the Australian Government Department of Health, and they can tell you what's going on there, because I can't say it on here. And we did do an in-depth video in there. If you do want to find it, it's right there. And Australian residents may now be facing homelessness for the first time in their lives. Mayhem by 2025. It was a prediction I made a few months back. Australians, don't borrow your way out of recession. The more you take, the more you will pay. And Australia, don't buy anything. I was warning people 4 years ago not to get into this housing market because it's a trap. If interest rates keep going up, which they did. So let's start off here. So Australia's housing crisis, how the RBA interest rate hikes are pushing families closer to the edge. So some people are paying 7-8% on their mortgages now, but the problem is they're not buying houses like they would in red states of America for $200,000. They're paying a lot of money. So their home costs $700,000, and since the rate rises, their mortgage has jumped an extra $400 a month to $3,000. Despite refinancing 6 months ago, they have still had to cut down on spending. So the hardest thing, and this is where I try not to get emotional, but it's having to explain to the kids we can't do things that we used to. So there it is right there. People are over-leveraged. And so here it is. Interest rates to a decade high of 3.35 last week. Pressure has increased on mortgage holders. Again, the mortgage holders will be left, especially the Australian proper, will be left holding the bag. So there it is. Sorry, only pop-ups here. What can be done to improve Australia's rental crisis. So we've been talking about this too. Across Australia, there is a shortage of 173,000 affordable dwellings in the private rental sector available for these households, and 71% pay an unaffordable rent that is greater than 30% of the household income. That is very dangerous levels, because then you have no money for food, right? And it goes into 2.72 million Australians at risk of rental stress. So Savvy's 2022 cost of living survey learns how rising rents are impacting average Australians. So 1.42 million Australians devote 31 to 45% of their income to rent. Holy smokes! So what do they eat? Cardboard? 1.12 million reported spending 46 to 60% of their income on rent. So how can anyone save nowadays? 50% of 18 to 24-year-olds say that they're stressed out about rent or potential rent increases. 40% 23 to 34-year-olds cohort, and 33% 35 to 44-year-old cohort say the same. So there it is right there. And let's move along here. Reserve Bank of Australia raises interest rates to 11-year high. Opens door to a pause. There it is, 14 hours ago. So they're raising rates, and they're constantly raising rates to hedge against inflation. So latest increase would add $77 a month to repayments on a $500,000 home. But here's the problem: a lot of homes aren't $500,000 there. Like this absorbent crazy amounts of money that people pay for homes there. And we've been, going over these shacks that people are paying. And a lot of, these are American homes here. I got a little bit of the southern United States here where the weather's a bit warmer. And I mean, like, these kind of houses in Australia go for millions of dollars. A lot of these homes here come with a lot of land too, but still, look, 62,000, 100,000, and there's thousands of homes like this in the conservative red states of America. And I mean, it's endless. It just keeps going on and on and on. But Australia doesn't have this, right? Neither does Canada. Crown land. I think it's 92% of Canada is Crown land. I'm not sure. Maybe comment below how much of Australia is Crown land. All right, let's get back to what we're talking about so you guys can understand. Wages, there are places where wages are in line with housing prices. So let's get back to what we were saying here. Rate hikes right there, and this was just posted 11 hours ago, and we were warning people. So now what happened? Let's take a time travel back to 4.5 years ago. Finally, Australia raises rates. Housing will now correct. Bad debt will fall off. Finally, Australia raises rates, and housing will correct. So there it is right there. We were saying that this is 5 years ago, because they did raise interest rates. They did raise interest rates, and people were already defaulting 5 years ago. They were raising them in Canada, United States, everywhere. So banks couldn't really figure things out, and that's why they had to pull the trigger on the you-know-what. And food prices out of control, inflation kicking in hard, Australia interest rates going up 4 years ago. 50% crash forecasted for Australia, interest rates going up, middle class house broke, mass exodus 4 years ago. So you see, Australia must raise interest rates next month, because that's how dire straits it was going. Then 2 months ago, I made a video, Australians, don't borrow your way out of a recession. The more you take, the more you'll pay. But 4 years ago, look what was happening in Australia 4 years ago. Everybody was defaulting. Or not everybody, it was a good percentage of people that borrowed at the top. Now, after they cooled things off, pulled the trigger on the you-know-what, and now they're starting to raise rates to hedge against inflation. And this one right here, facts about older people facing homelessness. 1 in 6 people who were homeless on the census night on 2016 were age 55 and over. So the people that basically built the infrastructure in Australia are homeless. Are becoming homeless. Older women are the fastest growing group to experience homelessness in Australia. On any given night, around 18,600 people aged 55 and above are homeless. And Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people make up 8% of the older people experiencing homelessness. So there it is right there, folks. And let's move on here. So housing census. Now, we were talking about the empty homes and money laundering in Australia. There were 10,852,000 private dwellings counted in the 2021 census. 70% were separate houses, 13% were townhouses, and 16% were apartments. There were 1,043,000 unoccupied dwellings on census night. That's what they know, or that's what they're allowed to tell. I believe it's like 6 to 7 million. That's a crazy number. But when they say one, multiply it by 3, because they're always gonna lie to you, because this is the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And we talked about money laundering. So money laundering is destroying Australia. Chinese money laundering. Australian housing money laundering problem. Australia has the world's worst money laundering problem. Market. More Chinese capital is leaving China and making its way to Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Western Australia. Bank caught red-handed. Westpac faces fines over 23 million. Money laundering breaches. So it goes on and on. Australia needs more money laundering. So it needed money laundering because it was starting to people were starting to default, or not default. There was the markets, were red hot, and 63 billion laundered in Australia. That's my opinion. 3 years ago, I actually think it's 104 billion right now. That's been laundered through Australia through private real estate market. That's just me. I may be dead wrong. And let's go over to a cutoff town desperate as flood crisis bring food shortage. So you're getting flooding now happening. We're going into flood season there. It's the fall. Well, I don't know, fall. Yeah, they're going into their fall in about a week or two in Australia. We're in trouble. Australians risk food insecurity, expert warns. This is from August 8, 2022. And by the time it reaches your bowl, your Quaker oats may have completed an international round trip. The grain might be grown in Australia, but much of it is processed in the U.S. before we import it back as a final product. And that's why they need to start production and fabrication within their own country and stop exporting crap. Make it local. The grain's local, make it local. The iron's local, fabricate it local, right? And despite our reputation as the lucky country, the issues of hunger exist in Australia, but is largely unnoticed. So the reality is that 3.6 million Australians, 15%, have experienced food insecurity Sorry, guys, I'm reading through the phone. Let me just read through the screen. Let me go with the screen here. At least one in the last 12 months. Let's relate. The reality is 3.6 million Australians, 15% have experienced food insecurity at least once in the last 12 months. 3 in 5 of these individuals experience food insecurity at least once a month. So it's starting to take hold, and we were warning people back in the day where banks are now referring people to the food bank. They will raise interest rates and foodflation. So this is banks in Australia were referring people to food banks so they don't default on their mortgage. Look at that, pensioners can't afford food. And let's not forget the bushfires in Australia. And bushfires are a thing there too. And yeah, Australia's water goes corporate while country burns 3 years ago. So we covered this because we are trying to connect the dots across the Commonwealth, trying to figure out what's coming next to Canada, or what's heading to Australia next, or what's coming from New Zealand. Because a lot of these English-speaking countries have been on a warpath with us, with the private citizen, by raising taxes in turn to fund all kinds of BS that they're funding. I don't want to get into too much of that because I don't want to flag this video. But I wanted to put this out there. Is Australia woke to death? What is happening from their financials to their healthcare to everything that has been occurring down under? And what ideas are our governments in Canada and the blue states of America looking at to implement that they are doing it? Because in Australia, we did a big Mike in the Night with Darwin, Australia being taken over by cameras, and technology was being brought in from China to set up cameras in Darwin, Australia. This was back in 2019, and facial recognition software and all that stuff. So woke to death. Comment below if you're down under. Leave your testimony below. Let us know what is happening, whether it's in the health sector. How are you being affected? How are governments disenfranchising you down under? Let us know in the comments. I really appreciate hearing what you guys have to say. I'll see you guys on the flip side. Mike Martins here. I have spoken.